Meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to meeting number 7 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. I'd like to start the meeting by providing you with some information following the motion that was adopted in the House on Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020 on hybrid format sittings. The committee is now sitting in hybrid format, meaning that members can participate either in person or by video conference. Witnesses must appear by video conference. All members, regardless of their method of participation, will be counted for the purposes of quorum. The committee's power to sit is, however, limited by the priority use of the House of Commons resources, which is determined by the party whips. All questions must be decided by a recorded vote unless the committee disposes of them by unanimous consent or on division. And finally, the committee may deliberate in camera, provided that it takes into account the potential risks of confidentiality inherent to such deliberations with remote participants. Today's proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. A reminder that the webcast will always show this person speaking and not the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules. I think most of you are familiar with these rules, but also for the benefit of the witnesses that appear, I know you might be wondering why I go through this each time, but especially when we have new witnesses, I think it's important. So the members and the witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of floor English or French. So please make sure you select the appropriate language at this time. Before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. Even after lots of experience, we all forget to do this sometimes, and please mute yourself after you're done speaking as well so there's no interruptions. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. And if a member wishes to intervene on that point of order, then you can raise your hand using the actual function by clicking on it in the participants section. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And unless there are exceptional circumstances, the use of headsets with the boom mic is mandatory. Should any technical challenges arise, please notify the chair and we'll try to rectify the issue and may have to suspend for a few moments while doing so. For those participating in person, proceed as you usually would at a committee meeting. And in order to get my attention, physically raise your hand or you can gesture or call out my name. And if you have a point of order, wait for the appropriate time. Myself and the clerk will try to keep a consolidated list of those in the room and those raising their hand virtually. Okay. Today, to start with the formal part of our meeting, I'd like to welcome Mr. Anton Bogman, who is the Chief Electoral Officer from Elections British Columbia. Welcome to our committee. Thank you for being here. And also alongside, we have Elections Saskatchewan, and appearing from Elections Saskatchewan is Dr. Michael Boda, the Chief Electoral Officer from that province. So welcome to our committee. You each have five minutes each for opening remarks, and thank you for sending your opening remarks to us. These were circulated this morning to all the committee members, so you can follow along if you wish to do so that way. And then we will proceed with formal questioning rounds. So this committee generally will go through 2 to 3 rounds of questions between the various parties, and I'll let you know how many minutes you have beforehand so there's no confusion. Okay, please go ahead, Mr. Bogman.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation to address the committee today. As you know, my name is Anton Bogman. I'm BC's Chief Electoral Officer, a position that I've held since 2018. Prior to this appointment, I was Elections BC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer for Operations for 8 years. I've also served in a senior management capacity at Elections BC since 2004, administering 5 provincial general elections and 4 provincial referenda. 2 of those referenda were held entirely by mail. My remarks this morning are in relation to the administration of the 42nd provincial general election in BC, which is still underway. General voting day was Saturday, October 24, and while the campaign period and voting for the election are complete, we are still preparing for the final count of over 600,000 absentee and mail-in ballots, which will begin on November 6. This context will frame my remarks. They will reflect the BC electoral legislation, and they will reflect the public health situation and rules in place in BC preceding and during the campaign period. My understanding is that this committee intends to study the challenges posed to the normal conduct of federal elections by the COVID-19 pandemic and identify the measures to be taken to adapt the approach and conduct of a general election to preserve the health and safety of all Canadians. To address this objective, I'll provide two broad comments and then speak to the top three challenges that we faced administering a pandemic election in BC. To begin, everything associated with election administration in a pandemic is challenging. From retaining returning officers, finding office space, securing voting places, to recruiting and training election officials and implementing voting processes. Each element is more complex and nuanced and requires many unique and targeted mitigation measures. As an example, voting places usually include many close contact interactions, shared spaces, and shared materials, all of which create a virus transmission risk. To mitigate this, we had to re-engineer the voting place and voting processes to allow for physical distancing and only one election official per voting station. We placed acrylic barriers on voting tables and provided election officials with personal protective equipment. There was more frequent cleaning. We established sanitation stations at entry and exit points. And we allowed voters to bring their own pen or pencil to mark their ballot. The pandemic also made election planning and preparation significantly more challenging. Developing and implementing a pandemic election model that maintains accessibility and integrity while ensuring safety for voters, election officials, and political participants was unheard of pre-COVID. Major elements that were crucial to our success included early and ongoing consultation with public health experts, our ability to vary from legislation in response to an emergency or extraordinary circumstance, and ongoing access to necessary funding. I don't have time in my opening statement to speak in more detail on this theme, but would be pleased to do so in response to members' questions. Within the context of a pandemic election and a rapidly changing environment, three key challenges emerged that I believe are relevant to federal elections. These were providing safe and accessible voting opportunities to at-risk voters and communities so that they are not administratively disenfranchised. Scaling capacity to meet significantly increased demand for vote by mail, and maintaining safety and business continuity at Elections BC headquarters, in district electoral offices, and in voting places. During our planning for a pandemic election, it became apparent that with effective safety plans and protocols in place, and more in-person voting opportunities, as well as enhanced access to remote voting options, the vast majority of British Columbians would be able to vote safely. It was equally apparent, however, that at-risk or self-isolating voters, voters in care homes, voters in specific communities like First Nations communities would face significantly greater challenges to participating in the election. The use of tailored voting options and focused and ongoing communications, at times involving a much broader set of stakeholders than usual, was necessary to reduce barriers to voting. The tailored voting options included community-organized vote by mail, hiring and training of community members to administer voting within their community, the use of mobile teams with full protective equipment, and expanding of operator-assisted telephone voting. Administrative flexibility was also critical to effectively respond to changing circumstances and new outbreaks. Scaling capacity to support major increases in vote by mail was identified early as a critical issue. We conducted voter surveys through the summer that indicated 35% of British Columbians would prefer to vote by mail if an election were held during the pandemic. Greater use of this option was also an essential element in our strategy to spread voters across multiple voting options to reduce lineups and congestion at voting places and to allow for effective physical distancing at in-person voting opportunities. We were able to leverage existing processes, systems, and partnerships that had been in place previously for provincial referenda that were conducted entirely by mail. Further, legislation was adapted, vote-by-mail packages were modified to support automated production, and inbound voting request channels were streamlined to support high-volume efficiency. During the campaign period, we received and fulfilled over 720,000 requests for vote-by-mail packages, which was an increase of more than 7,200% over the last provincial election in BC in 2017. Last, the issue of maintaining safe spaces and business continuity across all work locations was a key challenge, particularly within the tight timelines established in law. We had to mitigate the risks to staff and voter safety and the risk of potentially having to close a district electoral office or voting place because of an outbreak. We worked with the provincial health officer, WorkSafe BC, and regional health authorities to develop safe electoral office and voting place plans and emphasize their implementation and monitoring. Each office and voting place had a customized safety plan. The effort to address this challenge was significant and should not be underestimated. I'm very gratified to be able to say that during the campaign period, we passed a number of WorkSafe BC pandemic safety audits, and there were no COVID-19 exposure events at voting places, offices, or at our headquarters in Victoria. Madam Chair, that concludes my opening statement. I'm now happy to respond to any questions that committee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Boda, if we could hear from you, please.
Madam Chair, honorable members, thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today. My name is Michael Boda. I'm the Chief Electoral Officer for the province of Saskatchewan. I've been here in Saskatchewan, back here in Saskatchewan since 2012, but for the last 2.5 decades, I've worked on election administration around the world in places like the US, the UK, and a lot of developing countries. Last Monday at 8 p.m., voting closed for Saskatchewan's provincial election with approximately 434,000 voters having cast their ballots. Initial participation rates look to be about 52% of eligible voters. In 2016, that was about 54%. Almost every aspect of administration of our provincial election has been impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic, except perhaps that turnout, which looks to be very close to our 2016 numbers. I do hope that some of those turnout numbers can be traced back to the significant effort we put into ensuring voters knew that voting would be no more risky than a trip to the local grocery store. While there's been much time to assess the conduct, there hasn't been much time to assess the conduct of the election. We're actually completing our final count this weekend. I want to describe for you 3 key steps that I believe have contributed to what has unfolded so far. A first step focuses very much on our adapting Saskatchewan's election system to lower the risk of spreading the coronavirus. In fact, there were many methods we pursued to achieve this, but our overarching approach is focused on building capacity in our now 3 principal areas of voting. Reinventing our absentee or vote by mail function in 2016, just 1% of voters participated in this way, while doing everything we can to make both advance and election day voting safer. Not knowing how many electors would take advantage of each of these opportunities, we had to quickly build capacity for vote by mail so that we could allow for applications starting more than 2 months before the election day for voters who felt that attending a poll could be a health hazard for them. Early on, we also determined that to make things safer, in-person voting opportunities would need to be spread out in a very different way, meaning that we might have, where we might have had 5 or 6 polls at a location in 2016, we instead would have just 2 or 3 polls. In the end, our number of polling locations grew from just 1,100 in 2016 to nearly 1,900 in 2020. In a second step, we understood that as an election management body, we would not only need to ensure our physical polls met the safety standards of public health officials, but that our voters and workers would have to be convinced that in-person voting would be safe, even with elevated levels of COVID-19. Working closely with our Chief Medical Health Officer, we adapted our physical polls in order to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19. Our 2020 polls look very different than in 2016, with protocols including physical distancing, hand sanitizing, barriers between voters and workers, masks being required for all workers and scrutineers, and a strong recommendation that all voters wear a mask. While I believe we took every reasonable step to make our polls safer, this really wasn't enough. We also had to ensure that voters knew that the polls would be safe. In the weeks leading to the election, we worked very hard to educate stakeholders, voters, scrutineers, and election workers so that if perceptions of the risk of COVID-19 changed in the province, stakeholders would remain convinced that visiting the polls in person would be safe. A third and final step that has been essential to the effective conduct of our election relates to the importance of relationships between election administrators and our stakeholders. As Chief Electoral Officer, I could not have conducted this election without a strong recognition among voters, government, the Legislative Assembly, parties, candidates, school boards, First Nation communities, personal care facilities, and so on, that to be successful in 2020, the process would have to unfold very, very differently than in 2016. Perhaps most important has been our relationship, my relationship with the Office of the Chief Medical Health Officer. As an election administrator, I have always believed that an election is not merely a technical exercise, but that strong relationships with stakeholders are essential to the success of the conduct of an event. And our 2020 election in Saskatchewan has only reinforced that for me. Working with all stakeholders, we've had to adapt to ensure that the process was safer for everyone participating. So thank you again for the opportunity to participate, and I also would be pleased to answer any questions. Madam Chair.
Thank you to both of our witnesses. Just so everybody is aware and they can plan accordingly, I just wanted to remind you that we're going to be going until approximately 12:30 today with the formal meeting with the witnesses. We might stop sooner if there is an appropriate time to break because we have to transition into the subcommittee meeting, and the subcommittee meeting is only for the members of the subcommittee, obviously, so the main members can leave the meeting at that point, and we will carry on in camera with the different link and the different password to sign into the subcommittee meeting. And so, yeah, so be prepared for that around 12:30. We're going to start with our 6-minute round with Mr. Doherty, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our guests. Mr. Boogman, as the only Member of Parliament from British Columbia, I will center my questions on our election that we've just gone through. Mr. Boogman, we held our election, our provincial election, on Saturday. It's the first time that a weekend provincial election has been held since the early 1900s. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct.
What was the last time it was held on a weekend?
I don't have the exact date that it was held in historically. Okay. I know for the past 4 elections, it's always been on a Tuesday in May.
Okay. Did it present, holding the election on a weekend, did it present any unique challenges, or was it more beneficial?
It was more beneficial from a number of perspectives. One was in terms of access to election workers, especially in the pandemic when many older workers who typically are the election workers are in an at-risk category. It allowed us to recruit younger workers and workers who were able to work on a Saturday because it was a weekend for them.
Go ahead, sorry.
So it also allowed us access to other locations that were not necessarily available during a weekday, particularly in relation to the pandemic. It enabled us to use schools as voting places on the Saturday and Sunday of the advance voting period, as well as on voting day, in a way that enabled us to integrate our safe voting place plans with the safe school plans. among which was keeping the school communities closed when students were in place, having voting on weekends, was able to use those facilities.
Did Premier Horgan consult you before calling a snap election?
Premier Horgan did not consult with me before calling the snap election.
So would you say you were fairly prepared for this, or would you have required a little bit more extra time? Because it seemed like everything went smoothly on E-Day.
British Columbia, like the federal situation, we were in a minority government situation, and my mandate requires that we be ready. We started working immediately on the onset of the pandemic on our plans to administer an election during a pandemic. Following the political signs in British Columbia and media speculation, we advanced our planning in over the summer. And although it was certainly a scramble to the startup, I believe that we were well prepared for the election.
I've read your Safe Voting Place COVID Workplace Plan and how to campaign safely during COVID-19. For the most part, did political parties adhere to your how to campaign in a COVID environment plan?
Yes, my understanding is that there were no issues in relation to the campaigning side of things.
Did Elections BC promote the measures being taken to ensure voter confidence in the process, but also in the safety of the polling stations?
Yes, we did. We had a press conference the day after the call of the election, which focused heavily on safe voting and the processes in place. Our advertising campaigns were reworked during the pandemic, during the early stages of the pandemic, to emphasize safe voting and the alternative voting options that we had in place. And it was a continual focus of us through our media interviews and presentations that we made during the campaign period.
How are you handling the sheer volume of the mail-in ballots? We know that we're not going to have the final results until November 16th, but did you anticipate the sheer volume that we received?
We did anticipate it. As I mentioned, we had done surveys over the summer, which indicated on a consistent basis that approximately 35% of British Columbians would choose to vote by mail in a pandemic. And that informed our planning and reorienting our systems and infrastructure around vote by mail to support that kind of volume. As you know, we've had a number of purely vote by mail referenda in the province, and we were able to use the infrastructure, systems, and processes that had been developed for those events during the election. In terms of the count of the ballots, of course, we're distributing that across all 87 electoral districts. So the number within each district is manageable within the 3 days that we have assigned for final count.
Did you find it challenging to source personal protective gear for all of your polling stations?
It was challenging, but we started, that was identified early as a long lead time item. And so it was our focus of the end of July and throughout August to make sure that we could access supplies. And we also tapped into some of the supplies that the province was having through their portal.
Okay. Your workforce, was it predominantly older or younger at this time, or was it an average? Obviously, it brought the workforce down in age, but predominantly still same volunteers, same employees that you've had previously?
I don't have statistics on our workforce composition, but could get that if necessary. Anecdotally, I've heard that the workforce was younger than it was previously.
I just have to say, as a British Columbian, that I felt very safe, and so did our family and our neighbors. And I talked with your employees at the polling stations, and they all felt very safe, and there was no complaints.
Thank you.
Right.
I think that's got my questions, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Duncan, next for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. We appreciate your time, your experience, and your expertise. I have many questions, so I'm looking for short answers, most often a yes or no. And I'll start with Mr. Bogeman, please. Can you table with the committee how many safety audits you passed, please?
We had 3 that I'm aware of that we passed.
Thank you. And can you table with the committee what that safety audit looked like, or just the categories, please?
I don't have the reports in front of me.
Could you table it?
I could, yes.
Thank you. That's fine. We understand that there was provincial health guidelines for the election to keep each of communities, candidates, staff, and volunteers safe during the election. Would you be willing to table that guidance with the committee, please? Yes or no? Thank you so much. Did local health units provide any additional guidance? Again, looking for a yes or no answer, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Could you table with the committee under what circumstances, please?
The circumstances were in relation to voting in acute care hospitals and healthcare run care homes.
Thank you. That leads right into my next question. I appreciate that. Could you table with the committee the recommendations you made to ensure the health and safety of BC residents and staff of long-term care while ensuring their right to vote, please?
Yes, I'd be pleased to do so.
Thank you so very much. Was there public health guidance for other congregate settings beyond long-term care, yes or no? Please.
Not specifically, no.
Okay, thank you so much. Could you table a comparison of the guidance for a usual election side by side the guidance for this election, yes or no, please?
Yes.
Thank you so much. This is so helpful. Could you table what health and safety measures were put in place at the polling stations for election day? Yes or no, please?
Yes.
Did you have the same number of polling stations as usual? Yes or no, please?
We had more.
Thank you. Did you have the same number of workers as usual? Yes or no, please?
We had less.
Thank you. Were your costs the same as usual? Yes or no?
No, they were more.
Would you be willing to table the percentage change in those last 3 questions with the committee, please?
Certainly the first 2, we can table. I can table the reports once my CEO report on the administration of the event is complete.
Lovely. Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Bogeman. And now over to Dr. Boda, please. Was there provincial health guidance for the election to keep each of committees, candidates, staff, and volunteers safe during the election? Yes or no, please?
Yes, there was. The Chief Medical Health Officer issued some of this.
Thank you. And would you be willing to table that guidance with the committee, please?
I think you'll have to talk to the Chief Medical Health Officer about that.
Thank you so much. Did local health units provide additional guidance, yes or no?
No, not the local.
Thank
the
you.
Chief Medical Health Officer did.
Thank you. Could you table with the committee what recommendations you made to ensure the health and safety of Saskatchewan residents and staff of long-term care while ensuring their right to vote, please?
I know you're asking for quite a bit of tabling, and we're in the middle of an election, as you can appreciate right now. So I will certainly try to help you out as much as I possibly can.
I appreciate that very much. We're grateful. We want to learn from you. Are you able to table a comparison of the guidance for a usual election side by side the guidance for this election to the best of your ability?
Can you repeat the question?
Could you table a comparison of the guidance of a usual election side by side the guidance for this election to the best of your ability?
I'll do that.
Thank you so very much. Could you table what health and safety measures were put in place at the polling stations for Election Day, please?
Yes, we can provide some information on that.
Thank you so much. Could you, you told us how many polling stations were used this time. How many workers were used this time, please?
We don't have an exact number yet, but it was in the range of 15,000 as compared to about 13,000 last time.
Thank you. Could you table with the committee what percentage increase you had in mail-in ballots, please? And the percentage and the comparison in costs for the election, please.
I can provide for you the increase in vote by mail ballots. The figures will not be available until I release my statutory report on the expense of the elections. After that, we can certainly table it.
I'd just like to say thank you to both of you for your time, your expertise, and being so gracious. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Madame Normandin, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the two witnesses for sharing their expertise with us. My questions are for both witnesses. My first question is there a system that was put into place to, let's say, someone was confirmed contagious at voting time? How did you deal with this, with the fact that they might have been in contact with another person? This has to do with the Alert COVID application as well. Did you coordinate anything here?
Maybe I'll start. British Columbia doesn't use the Alert COVID application. The responsibility for notification and for tracing, of course, is with our medical system. We would have taken guidance from them should there have been a positive exposure case at a voting place. Certainly, our safety plans indicated the necessary cleaning that we needed to have in place, detailed the distancing and the use of protective equipment to mitigate the potential for an outbreak to occur. As I mentioned, I'm very gratified that we did not have any of these, but the notification and the other steps would have been the responsibility of the medical authorities in British Columbia.
I'd like to hear Dr. Boda's response, if possible, please.
Sure. During the day, we were fortunate to have the COVID-19 had a very minimal impact on the process, but we did identify 4 individuals who were close contacts of cases of COVID, and in those instances, those individuals were removed as workers. There was a cleaning process that unfolded. And all of this came through guidance from the Chief Medical Health Officer as to how to proceed. We were in constant touch with the Chief Medical Health Officer throughout the day in order to receive guidance on how to proceed. We did have a couple of cases of COVID in advance during during the training process, and at that time, we again worked with the Chief Medical Health Officer in order to determine how to move forward.
Thank you. Yes or no answer. Mr. Bogma, I understand that you didn't have any way of tracing those people who had been in contact with the COVID. Is that correct?
Perhaps the statement that I was telling you was in relation to the actual contact tracing and orders from the medical authorities to self-isolate or what was necessary. Of course, in our voting places, we knew who was working in our voting places. We could notify individuals in our voting places who, if anything were to happen. There were some instances where individuals were ill and went for COVID tests that turned out to be negative. But of course, in those instances, when they indicated that they were ill, we did notify the other individuals who were in that workspace to make them aware that that was happening. And per our plans, they were then told to self-monitor until the results came back.
Merci, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Boda. Same question.
Yes, well, throughout the day, we knew who was in the polling location at the time, at all times. And at that point, if there was an individual who was identified as a case, that would have been directed directly to the local medical health officer, and contact tracing would have been pursued. But all of that was completed through the Chief Medical Health Office.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd like to ask some questions about the campaigning difficulties for candidates. I'd like to begin with Mr. Boegman. Did you hear about any problems that were experienced by the smaller parties? And is there a post-mortem that's going to take place now?
Yes, once the election is complete, we will do an extensive series of postmortems with our own district staff, with the political parties, with candidates. We will survey them to understand what their experiences were. I'm not aware of any specific or unique challenges that were raised. Of course, the entire process was very different. There was no door knocking. There was more remote contact. There was use of mail. There was use of phone. There were distanced and people wearing masks, standing on street corners with signs that you usually see. But the entire way that political parties and candidates campaigned was different in COVID.
Merci, Dr. Boda.
Thank you, Dr. Boda. Now, please.
Sure. Perhaps in Saskatchewan, it was a little bit different than in British Columbia. There was door knocking that was allowed. My mandate is not to oversee campaigning. However, I was in close contact with the Chief Medical Health Officer. He asked for guidance with respect to how to proceed. And in the end, we determined that the Ministry of Health guidance would supersede anything that I would put forward. There were some general principles that were there. We didn't have any general problems. Certainly there weren't large gatherings of any sort, but door knocking was allowed to proceed in the same way that other similar activities were allowed to proceed, such as door-to-door sales.
Thank you, Dr. Boda, and thank you, Madame Normandin. Mr. Blakey, 6 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to both our witnesses who I know I know elections don't end on election day, and you're both very busy, so we appreciate your time here. On the theme of political parties, I wanted to ask, do you think it would be useful for there to be some kind of advisory committee consisting of a member of the registered parties or a representative of the registered parties, someone from the Elections Authority and someone from the Public Health Authority, in order to be able to discuss campaigning methods and the public risks, public health risks that can arise? I know I believe that they have a body like that in British Columbia, and we heard from the Chief Medical Officer in British Columbia that that was a useful body, but I'd just like to get your own respective opinions about that. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Boda and then go to Mr. Boegman.
Sure. There were a variety of mechanisms by which I sought input with respect to the political actors. I do work closely with our 6 registered political parties and receive input for them. Leading up to the election, however, we established what was called the Electoral Advisory Group, which was constituted of myself as chair, the Chief Medical Health Officer, and the 2 House leaders from the Legislative Assembly. We met once a month in order to discuss the current situation with COVID-19 and some of the challenges that's related to, for example, campaigning. However, in the end, the decisions that were made were mine, but I was seeking advice from particularly the Chief Medical Health Officer, but the 2 House leaders as well. So that was the process here.
Mr. Boegman?
Yes, you're correct. There is established in our legislation an election advisory committee that is represented by 2 members from each political party that has members in the House, as well as a political party that has campaigned in 50% or more of the seats in the province. I find that there has a legislative requirement to formally consult with this committee on certain things, for example, for recommendations for legislative change. But I also use the body as a forum to discuss other aspects of electoral administration, to share best practices. During the summer, prior to our election call, as part of our readiness activities, I facilitated a meeting of this committee with the provincial and deputy provincial health officer, specifically to talk about campaigning. Like Dr. Boda mentioned, I don't have a mandate to oversee the campaign activities, but I felt it important to bring together the parties as well as the medical health experts to talk about the issues, to talk about what the challenges are, to talk about how typical campaigning activities should need to be modified to meet the public health requirements. The parties then did submit to the medical health officer their safety plans for commentary. We also took the information that we had discussed and we disseminated on a more broad base with all of the smaller political parties in British Columbia so that everyone was up to speed on what the changes are. Just to summarize, I found it very effective and very helpful in discussing the issues and making sure that the information was being shared.
Thank you. In your opening comments, I think you both alluded to working with some specific communities, like First Nations communities, but I'm also thinking of other populations that might have challenges when it comes to voting, particularly in a pandemic context, like people living with disabilities. We talked about seniors, students who may not have all the campus voting options that they're used to. I'm just wondering if you could help explain any risks that you saw that may not have come to fruition in terms of certain populations being disenfranchised during a pandemic election. What are some of those risks, and what were some of the best practices you found can mitigate those risks? And maybe we'll start with Mr. Boogman this time and then go to Mr. Boda.
Sure. So this will build from my comments during my opening statement, because I did see that as a particular challenge in terms of providing safe and accessible opportunities to at-risk voters and unique communities. Many of our First Nations communities, as an example, were isolating and continue to isolate. So trying to make contact with them, trying to establish what would be the best way to provide voting to that community, and having a range of options, of accessible options that could meet the needs of that community were essential to be able to provide voting. It was certainly a challenge additionally because of the nature of the election in British Columbia. It was a snap election. It was not held on a fixed date. And as a result, it was challenging to get the attention of people in some communities in relation to election plans when it wasn't necessarily the first thing on their horizon. We put a lot of effort into how we're going to administer voting for remote communities, also thinking about situations such as deployed military. There was an instance of a warship, I believe, the HMCS Winnipeg, that was at sea when the election was called and was not going to be coming into port before voting day. And we were able to use operator-assisted telephone voting, which is in place under the special voting rules in British Columbia, to provide an opportunity for the deployed sailors to cast their ballot. So in summary, it takes a lot of communication, it takes a lot of planning, and you need to have a flexible toolkit to be able to meet the unique circumstances of communities and be able to adapt if their situation should change.
Thank you, Mr. Boogman. And that's all we have for this round. Next, we've got...
Très rapide point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente.
On a point of order, Before we begin the next room, could Mr. Blakey please correct the problem with his headset because the interpreters have trouble with it?
Plugging it in again, so I hope I'm coming through more clearly now.
Oh, no, you're not coming through clearly yet. So.
Okay, well,
perhaps
I don't know that's something we want to resolve right now, or if we want to continue on with questioning. And
Madam Chair?
We will continue on. We'll have the clerk maybe. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Just to tell both of you quickly, apparently they're getting a good quality sound right now. So I've gotten a thumbs up.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we're probably good. Great. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing that up. Mr. Tucker, 5 minutes.
Thank you to our witnesses today. I'm going to be focusing mostly on my province with Mr. Boda and the election that he just held, and the context a little bit of my questions about, we have the American election going on right now, and I'm sure we're all anxious to see the results down south. And I have confidence in our electoral system here in Canada versus I think some of the problems that might come out of having a decentralized and state-run election. It'll be very interesting tonight to see how that unfolds. I got a couple technical questions for Michael Boda, and as we're all political geeks here, we all get elected, especially the members on the call here, that usually on a mail or on a ballot. The ballot usually has the counterfoil that maybe some of the members don't remember working past elections, not as candidates, but as scrutineers. And we had an issue in Saskatchewan where the counterfoil, which is part of the ballot, made of the same material, looking the same, and it's used so that we can reference how many ballots are in the ballot box versus how many are voted, and you separate the counterfoil and then you can count them afterwards. The problem we experienced in Saskatchewan is that counterfoil was put also in the ballot box, or encouraged to do that. That's where it ended up. And then when they opened the ballot box to count, I've heard numerous stories of issues with that. And I guess to Mr. Boda, is that something that you would not encourage other elections to be run with the counterfoil being put in the ballot?
Well, I would have to assess it first. I had not heard that to be a problem. One of the challenges is that the counterfoils are put into the ballot box after the fact, and then those remain in there so that we can evaluate after the fact. So I haven't heard this to be a problem, Mr. Tucker, but I would certainly be willing to look into it further.
So I heard from anecdotal, and I'm sure the debrief that we just had last Monday, so totally understand that it might take some time to digest all the findings of the election. But it was more in the counting that there was ballots that were potentially could be viewed as a foil and thrown into one pile and or not counted, or any of the precautions. But anyhow, okay. I'll move on. Just FYI, if we can look into that for Saskatchewan, and then for our federal election, whenever that occurs, I strongly recommend that we separate the two. On the mail-in
Just to be clear,
ballot,
Mr. Tucker, I on the counterfoil is not put into the ballot box when the ballot is cast. That's normally the way it works. The counterfoil remains outside the box. It may be that after the fact they were placed into the ballot box, but I'm certainly willing to look into it further. Absolutely, not a problem.
No, I appreciate that. For myself, when I voted in person, you had to force it into the ballot box, which is, awesome that we had that much kind of turnout in my poll. Right. And okay. But they were encouraged. The worker actually said, no, you have to put it in the ballot box, which makes it a little challenging. But I digress, and I'm sure we'll figure out if that was widespread, or maybe it was just locally in Saskatoon, the instructions to put in the ballot box. The other concern I had was with the mail-in ballots, that we listed all the registered parties that you could just write in the name of the party versus the candidate. And I'm wondering what your experience, or if you've heard back on how many spoiled ballots there were with people that put a party down as who they wanted to vote in the mail-in ballot, but ultimately there was no candidate for that party. So that ballot would have been somewhat spoiled. Do we know how many roughly?
Well, we're still in the midst of the count. We had our what was called our second preliminary count this past week, and during that time, that was when the vote by mail ballots were begun to count. We began to count them, and now this coming Saturday, we will count the rest of those ballots. These are Form B ballots, as you mentioned, where you either write down the candidate or the political party, and so that is how it is counted. With respect to your question, I don't have the numbers of rejected ballots yet, but I will have those relatively soon, but we have to get through the process first.
No, I appreciate that, and appreciate the fact we actually invited you to come to the committee a day after on Tuesday, and how ridiculous of a request that maybe on our part as a committee, because I know how busy you are right now, and the election isn't over. So just quickly, my time's going to run out here, but I just want to say thank you for the election you ran. I believe it was fair, and under the circumstances, everyone did as best they could. One question I had,
that's all the time we have. The 5 minutes has been up. So anyways, we do appreciate you being here, Dr. Broda, and I'm sorry if we were too eager to get you here as soon as possible, but we're eager to undertake this study and figure out how to run an election from coast to coast to coast. It's a big undertaking. So next we've got Mr. Turnbull for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to both the witnesses today. It's really great to have you here. I think already I'm really impressed by your testimony and have learned a lot from you already. Mr. Boogman, maybe I'll start with you, and my questions will probably be relevant for both of you. I'm interested in the mail-in ballots and just the sheer increase in the number. I know you said that the survey that you had done prior to the BC election suggested that voters said about 35% of them said that they would be likely to prefer a mail-in ballot. Is that consistent with what you saw? Because sometimes people say in surveys that they'll act a certain way and then later they don't behave the way they said they would. Is it pretty consistent?
Our experience was that it was very consistent, and we're certainly within the 30 to 35% range in terms of requests for packages and issued. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. And you said it was an actual increase of 7,200%, and that's for anybody out there, that's everyone can recognize that that's just a huge, massive increase in the demand for those mail-in ballots. You also mentioned that you had done quite a bit of work in the past to sort of revamp, and I just wondered, how much that previous work set the foundation for being able to have a successful election with such an increase. Could you speak to whether you streamlined the user experience for individual electors? Just like mail-in ballots can be a little bit complex, I think, for people maybe, or a bit scary, even if you haven't done it before. Did you streamline the experience to make it simple for people? I guess there's 2 points that I want to make. One is just in response to your first comment about how well prepared we were based on our previous experience. And I would say that without the previous work that we had done, it would have been extremely challenging to provide a similar level of service in terms of the requests that we received, being able to fulfill those. So it was essential to our ability to provide vote by mail on that scale was the work that we had done previously. I also think that the familiarity of most British Columbians with the vote by mail process was directly related to their experience in previous vote by mail events. In 2011, there was a full provincial referendum held by vote by mail on a tax issue. In 2015, Metro Vancouver, 1.6 million voters, had a mail-based plebiscite on another transportation and tax issue. And then we had a referendum on electoral reform province-wide in 2018. So our lessons learned from those events around the design of the voting package, the design of the instructions, how to minimize error through design were critical. One of the things, as an example, that we did is the voters were required to provide a shared secret on their certification envelope, which was their date of birth. We found that previously, if you just leave that as a blank field, a voter will often put in the date that they sign their certification envelope. They're used to signing a check or anything else. So we pre-populated that based on their first 2 digits of their year of birth. So that made it very evident to them that we were looking for the date of birth there, as opposed to having a free-form field. You had another question. I'm sorry, I've...
No, that's great. I mean, I'm really interested in that information because it sounds like you've done quite a bit of work to streamline the process. And I know you talked about developing the capacity and the fact that you had infrastructure systems and processes already in place. Is there any documentation of that you could table with this committee? I think it would be extremely helpful for us to look at that.
I'll certainly have a word with my team that was responsible for that aspect, and if there are operational documents that we're able to table, I will look to do that.
Appreciate that very much. And Dr. Boda, do you have anything to say on this? Because you also had a significant increase, I would imagine, for mail-in ballots. And have you had to streamline the process? Is there any insight that you can give us as well?
Sure. We in Saskatchewan have not had the experience with vote by mail that British Columbia has had in the past with 4 events. It's kind of practicing for this event. Our numbers have gone from 1% of individuals participating to about 12.5%. So there was a significant increase. Our model that we had to change our model because we did not feel that we would be able to manage or have the capacity to run the vote by mail. We had done significant survey research in advance, looking at what was going on in British Columbia, looking at our survey and looking at the Canadian survey as well. In our instance, actually the turnout for vote by mail was lower than we had anticipated. So that was good because we had to build centralized capacity for vote by mail. So that was very important.
Thank you, Dr. Boda. Madame Normandin, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I have a question for both witnesses. I'll begin with Dr. Boda. You both mentioned that the employees were younger this year. Did you have to set the criteria to ensure that this happened, or did this happen all by itself?
Well, yes, I did spend a lot of time messaging in advance that it was quite likely that some of our older workers who had traditionally worked for us would not be able to work for us because of COVID-19 and the concerns over a health hazard. So as a result, I focused very much on messaging to the public that we needed workers and that that new individuals who hadn't thought about participating, giving back to their democracy would become involved. So we did see anecdotally a lower age come forward. One of the things that we did in advance of the outbreak of COVID-19 was to change the legislation so that 16 to 18-year-olds could participate as workers. And so as a result, we initiated what was called the Youth in the Booth program, and we saw it was a significant increase in the number of 16 to 18-year-olds who participated. Now, I had asked for school not to be in place or not to be held on election day, and that was the case across the province. So as a result, students were able to participate in this way.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you. Mr. Bogman, please.
Yes, we also had a Youth at the Booth program that we had piloted first in 2017, and we reused for this election that focused on using high school students and university students as election workers. We didn't do any specific outreach like Dr. Boda mentioned. In fact, our experience was that once the election was called, there were many expressions of interest that were coming in via our website to our central human resources department and in district offices once they were open, of people who wanted to work as election workers or as office staff during the pandemic. So we did not have challenges in terms of numbers. Anecdotally, as I mentioned, I believe that the numbers skewed younger in terms of percentages. The challenge was more in trying to hire and train all those staff, especially considering our processes and the timeline. We were training them in smaller groups because they had to be distanced, and our proper safety protocols had to be followed in terms of organizing the training of election workers.
Thank you, Mr. Boagman. Next, we've got
Thank you very much. I just I want to come back to the question of groups that had particular challenges to voting, and provide Mr. Boda with an opportunity to share his experience. So if you need me to elaborate that question again a little bit, I'm happy to do that. But if not, I'd rather just give you the extra time.
Oh, thank you. Well, as you know, under normal circumstances, an election management body's job is not necessarily to get the vote out, at least not in Saskatchewan. It is to reduce barriers for all voters so that they would have access to the ballot. And that's something we've worked on for many years here in the province. With COVID-19, however, public health became the primary issue to make sure that we, and our slogan was voting safely is our priority. And so we were very, very focused on this. And then we had concerns about some groups who may not be able to participate in the same way because we had to focus so much on making sure the polls were safe. And some of these groups where we obviously do a lot of work with First Nations. We have 72 of them across our province, accessibility groups, students and seniors. And in that context, we were doing everything that we could while still maintaining the priorities of the public health authorities to give them access. And so I can tell you it was challenging, and it was challenging. The first thing I would think about is our First Nations, that there were a number of lockdowns, and I was working very closely with the chiefs and their councils in order to determine if we couldn't have a poll on the First Nations, how would we get the ballot to them? And so there was a lot of effort that went into that, but it is difficult in a COVID-19 context, no question.
Were there any particular things that you learned in the process of working with First Nations that you found helpful, that you would want Elections Canada to be aware of, and the members of this committee to be aware of, that we might be able to recommend Elections Canada get started on now in order to be able to have as smooth a process as possible for the federal election whenever it may occur?
Well, I have read Mr. Perot's report, and one of the things that is being asked for is that he would be able to adapt the process. And that was something that I was provided through regulatory changes, that I would be allowed to adapt the process. I wasn't allowed to change the process. And I think that was the line where it proved to be difficult to serve First Nations in some cases. Because I could not change the process, I had to consistently look at how I could adapt the process in order to serve them better.
Thank you, Dr. Boda. Next, we've got Mr. Lukiski for 5 minutes, please.
Very much, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today, and thank you for your service to Canada. Since I'm a Saskatchewan boy, I'm going to concentrate all my remarks with Mr. Boda. Specifically, Mr. Boda, you had mentioned in your opening comments that the voter turnout in Saskatchewan in the most recent election was 52%, which compares favorably to the previous election in 2016 when the voter turnout was 54%. And I suppose due to the fact that we were voting in the midst of a pandemic, that 2% decline in voter turnout was actually a good thing. However, frankly, I'm extremely concerned, and I have been for many, many years, about the steady decline in voter turnout across Canada. And perhaps I have the benefit of wisdom of my years, and I can remember back to elections 30, 40, perhaps even 50 years ago, when it was not uncommon to see election turnout, whether it be provincially or federally, 70% or higher. My question to you, particularly in light of the unprecedented amount of voters apparently turning out for the U.S. election, what steps do you think could be done to increase voter turnout, generally speaking? Now, I recognize that it's not the primary mandate of your office to be concerned with voter turnout, but certainly you would have a role to play. What do you think could be and perhaps should be done in the future to try and increase the level of voter turnout in our province?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. You will know from being from Saskatchewan that while my office's mandate is really focused on barriers to voting and focused on how we can lower those barriers for everyone, I have also done a fair amount of writing on this topic in op-eds and elsewhere over my concern about that diminished turnout rate. And my answer to that is that while I'm focused on barriers, I also want to work with other stakeholders, including political parties, but civil society, academics, thought leaders, in terms of how we can work together in order to increase that voter turnout. I remember those days as well, that there were higher turnout rates in Saskatchewan, and that has consistently been dropping. However, for the last two elections, we've been over that 50% mark, and that so I think we might have slowed it down, but we need to work together, not just the election management body. It's not its role to get the turnout rate up. It's to work together in order to move forward. So that's how I've been approaching it here in Saskatchewan. And my hope moving forward is that we will be able to increase that turnout rate.
Too, frankly, as I mentioned in my comments, I've seen that steady decline over the years, and I've always thought it would be a tragedy, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, that if in the future we would have as low as 30 or 40% of Canadians electing their national government or provincial governments. To me, that's just unacceptable. So I think we need to have a concentrated push, and I agree with your assessment that we need other stakeholders to become involved. But I would also suggest, Dr. Boda, that it should be, in my opinion at least, a primary function of your office to take a lead role in working with other stakeholders, other political parties, for an example, or civil liberty groups, to try and work together cohesively to try and increase voter turnout. Could you give me some more specificity of some of the things that perhaps you've done in the past or would like to do in the future to make sure that all Canadians and all people within each province of this great country of ours get committed to voting and recognizing that voting is a fundamental right and privilege that we should observe and get out to the polls every time and any time an election is called? What would you do specifically?
Well, what I would suggest is that we be very careful not to place the responsibility on the election management body for increasing the level of turnout. I think academics and thought leaders across the country will tell you that would be a losing effort. However, here in Saskatchewan, my goal and my approach has been to bring in those other stakeholders within civil society. And I think we do need to get serious about this given the level of turnout. And so I would bring them in and formalize the process, but I would not suggest that while the election management body is taking leadership, that they are the only actor in this space. And really, political parties are a significant actor in this role, but it goes beyond this. It goes to the academy, it goes to other civil society organizations. So perhaps a formalization of the process with the goal of increasing turnout would be important. But again, I would repeat that an election management body just doesn't have the capacity to increase that turnout. It can work on its main mandate, and that is to reduce barriers for all voters.
Thank you, Dr. Boda. Ms. Pettipat-Taylor, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you as well to both of you for being here and for your service to our country. Your testimony today has really been very, very helpful and will certainly help us during the process of putting together our report. Mr. Bogman, in your opening statements, I believe that you had indicated that it was critical to make sure that we educate our voters, our scrutineers, and our stakeholders to ensure that they have confidence and trust in our electoral process. And I'm wondering, what was your education campaign or your advertising campaign? What did it consist of to make sure that we could instill that trust within those individuals?
Thank you. I think it was actually Dr. Boda who had that statement in his opening comments, but I'd be very happy to just speak at a very high level about our processes. As I mentioned before, it was a snap election in British Columbia, so we did not have the usual opportunity to do outreach and education in the lead up with the various stakeholder groups. But we did, right after the election, I held a joint press conference with our provincial health officer. She was obviously speaking to the safety aspects and the public health aspects, but I was speaking about the process. I was speaking about trying to be as transparent as possible about what options voters would have, about our safety plans, emphasizing strongly that voting, while it would be similar, it would be different, but the differences would be what people had already come to expect when they went into a grocery store, or if they went and picked up a cup of takeout coffee, that sort of thing. So we really focused initially, and then through our advertising campaign and through our media outreach during the campaign period about safe voting, as well as being very transparent about communication. It was very different in terms of large numbers of vote by mail. So we made sure that we published the requests that we had received and the numbers of packages that had been issued across electoral districts throughout the campaign period. And the same thing, the day before Election Day, we held another press conference to describe what the process would be going forward through final count, so that voters, media, and political participants were very aware about how the process would unfold, about what information would be available and when, to make sure that they understood the process and therefore had trust in the process.
Thank you so much. Dr. Boda, would you comment as well on your comments that you had made earlier? My apologies for that.
Not a problem. Well, as I mentioned, voting safely is our priority, was part of our advertising campaign since the very beginning. Now we had the advantage of having an election date set in legislation, unlike in BC. And so we began that August the 15th, and it was integrated into everything that we advertised. So that was the formal approach. We also had an informal approach in that each time I was speaking to stakeholders, to the media, I was emphasizing the fact that the polls were safe. Now, we did this intentionally because we had to balance the system to make sure that it wouldn't be undermined. So, for example, if people were not confident in the polls being safe, they might move over to vote by mail and overwhelm the system so that it would shut down. And we had done a lot of research in advance in the United States, Australia, and North Korea in order to determine how we would most effectively move forward with respect to balancing that system, making sure that people knew that it would be safe at the polls, but we also had to make sure it was safe at the polls. And so we did a lot of heavy lifting in that regard to make sure that we were meeting the standards of the Chief Medical Health Officer.
And very quickly, because my time is limited, Canada is such a huge country, and we certainly recognize that COVID-19, the reality is different from coast to coast to coast. I come from Atlantic Canada. The matter is quite contained at this point, so it wouldn't be considered a hot spot, while perhaps in Winnipeg, that it would be considered a hot spot. So I'm wondering, did your communication strategy change within your province in order to address specific messaging for those specific hotspot areas?
Well, Saskatchewan is perhaps a microcosm of Canada in that it is very diverse as well. So overall, we did have one single message that was going out to voters across the province. But then as time moved on and we had to adapt, for example, with the Peter Ballantine First Nations, we had to direct our campaign specifically at that geographical area. And we did that in different ways. We used local media, but we also used Sask Alert, which is the texting system when things changed very quickly. Being able to be nimble was very important with respect to our election management body.
Thank you, Dr. Boda. Ms. Vecchio, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And going off with where Jeanette was talking, the fact is Canada is so vast, and across this country we're seeing a variety of different things. I just starting off with with Mr. Boagman. I'm from a smaller community. I have in my riding, I have a community called Elmer, and right now they're going through, and we've seen a huge number of cases going in that area. And when we're looking at it, a lot of times we'll talk about places like Toronto, but I'm looking at even smaller communities that have seen larger numbers when we know that that may cause fear for others to go out. Did you have any plans on how you would deal with small community outbreaks where there may not be 2 or 3 larger centers so that people could vote? Anything that would happen in those last couple of weeks where you're not expecting things and all of a sudden something changes, and how you would respond? Did you have a quick action plan for those types of things?
We did. Thank you for that question. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, having administrative flexibility as an election body was critical to to enabling us to effectively respond to changing circumstances and new outbreaks. We had 3 models for remote or voting or for serving isolated communities. One was the vote by mail, which was available, no excuse, anyone could use vote by mail. And we also targeted certain communities where collectively that group, they could all order vote by mail packages rather than individually through the website or through our 1-800 number, and we would then send them to those communities. Having the ability to use operator-assisted telephone voting was extremely valuable in those late-breaking situations. There was a First Nations community that went into isolation for an outbreak within the last 3 days of the campaign period. And we were going to be sending a team in there with full protective gear. But with those changing circumstances, we were able to pivot, and we used operator-assisted telephone voting to provide those voters with an opportunity to cast their ballot. So having that administrative flexibility is critical because there's not the time in a fixed election campaign to be able to try to put in place something that is not ready to go.
Sorry, I just want to continue on with that, Mr. Boagman, because when you mentioned that, I'm just looking at those smaller communities where there wouldn't be another center that you could send voters to, or there'd be different concerns. So going on that, how did you communicate that to those types of areas that within 3 days you'd have to pivot so that voters knew all of a sudden that they were going to be other options? What was your communication strategy for that?
So our communication strategy was directed right at community leaders. In the case of the First Nations community, it was band administrators and with the chief, and they were able to use their internal networks to make that available. We also had, for instance, using that through, if there was an acute care hospital, there were hospitals that would go into a lockdown because of outbreaks, and we had pre-planned communication tools that could be distributed at the patient level to enable them to use operator-assisted telephone voting. So pre-planning and making sure that we had thought of as many potential instances where we would need to pivot was very critical in ensuring that we could do so when necessary.
Thank you very much. I know for myself, I always think of Toronto. You know, we sit there and think, well, Toronto's got, this epidemic that's happening there, but we have to recognize that there's lots of different areas and there's lots of different sites that they may be able to go to, but into our smaller and rural communities, they may only have 1 or 2 options. Mr. Boda, what did you find in your province? Any quick tips that you have when it comes to communicating and pivotal changes that we would have to make?
Sure. I mentioned the ability to adapt in legislation and not change, and I think that was one of our real challenges, unlike in BC, where they did allow for telephone voting. I could not introduce telephone voting or any other kind. So there has to be a recognition that there are limitations with respect to how far you can go. We pushed our system by introducing extraordinary voting, and that was beyond when vote by mail, which was the primary source of providing options for people who couldn't go to the polls. We went beyond that with extraordinary voting, which involves using messengers and couriers in order to provide ballots to individuals where they couldn't get to the poll. But even that had its limitations, sadly, in a COVID-19 context. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is that there's very few, I was working under the premise with the Chief Medical Health Officer that there would be very few communities that would actually shut down. That would be in lockdown. First Nations, that was the situation, but in other communities, that wasn't the context. And if people could go to their local grocery store, we as a critical service, election administration, would be able to continue to deliver the polling location as long as we were following the protocols of the Chief Medical Health Officer. This wasn't a big gathering of people because we had been spreading out the voting significantly over the course of the electoral process, beginning August the 15th and moving all the way until October the 26th. And so as a result, we had prepared in advance with that capacity for an increased number of COVID-19 cases, much higher than it had been at the beginning of the writ period, and we were able to manage that process.
Thank you, Dr. Boda. Mr. Garrettson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. We certainly have the luxury of having seen many provinces go through elections in order to help inform our decisions. And so your participation today is extremely valued in that you are making the job from the federal perspective so much more easier, given that you're able to share your experiences. Mr. Boda, I'll start with you. On October 14th, in a CBC article, you said, quote, in 2016, we had about 1% of voters who took advantage of the vote by mail process. 1% is about 4,000. In this case, as of Tuesday, over 40,000 ballot applications have been received. You're referring to mail-in ballot applications there?
That's correct. We sent out ballots and they were received. We're now at 55,000.
So 55, great, 55,000. So 4,000 being 1%, 55,000 is then, what are we at there?
12.6%.
Pardon me, could you repeat that?
12.6%.
12.6%. Would you say that this process has helped to increase the voter turnout?
I would say that the strategy that we pursued, and again, we had a legislative election date, so we were able to begin planning not well in advance, but we were able to sustain the turnout rate.
Sustain it, which is considered an accomplishment given the current circumstances, correct?
I would agree.
Any indication or any reason for you to believe that there were increased fraudulent activities as a result of mail-in ballots?
No, we've introduced processes in order to ensure that there isn't double voting, and if there is double voting, we would know about it.
So you're very confident in the system that you used?
I'm confident in the system that we were able to create, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Boegman, I'll just go over to you for a second. Interesting, you were talking about both mail-in balloting and telephone balloting. We had your public officer of health on, and I felt awkward asking her the question because it really falls more under your purview. So I'll ask it more directly of you. Do you have any evidence or any concern with respect to voter fraud as a result of mail-in balloting?
No, I have no concerns in relation to voter fraud. Vote by mail, it's a proven process in BC. It's been used successfully in provincial elections and referenda for many years. As we've indicated, there have been 4 vote by mail events in British Columbia since 2002, with the most recent in 2018. And like Dr. Boda has mentioned, we have many processes in place to ensure that only eligible voters can vote by mail and that they can only vote once.
And tell me about your voting by telephone. Are you equally as satisfied with the security of that system?
I am. It's not a automated system. It's not a system where someone gets sent a PIN and they go in and they use their touch-tone phone to vote. It's operator assisted. So the voter is registered previously. The voter has to come and call in. They have to authenticate themselves based on information that only they would know about their voter record that we know. And they're then passed on anonymously at that point to the team that administers the vote. There's two people, so one of them records the vote, the other person verifies the vote back to the individual over the phone, and in that way the secrecy of that ballot is maintained. The other thing about vote by mail and other absentee ballots, of which assisted telephone voting is an option, is that they don't go directly into a ballot box and are counted on election night. Rather, they're enclosed in envelopes, the secrecy envelope and the certification envelope, and they then go through intensive screening process following election day to make sure that they can be counted at the final count, and that includes, making sure that they're properly registered, as well, that they didn't vote more than once.
So I only have about 30 seconds left, but very quickly, given the experience that each of you had, yes or no answer, would you recommend that the federal government consider vote by mail, in particular during a pandemic? Mr. Boda?
Yes.
And Mr. Boagman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All we have time for, I guess, is the block and NDP questions. So I'll allow for those, and then we will say goodbye to our witnesses and carry on into the subcommittee meeting. Madame Normandin, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais savoir si vous pouvez me donner la fourchette.
Thank you. I wanted to know what was the waiting time on average for people who went to vote? And I wanted to know if you have thought a little bit like for the emergency measures we had provided for. Have you thought, did you think about people voting a certain day, like over more than one day?
I would say, first of all, that we did not experience the long lineups. That was by intention and design in the system beginning August the 15th with vote by mail, and that was quite a success, I believe, in Saskatchewan. Your other question was.
Avez-vous tenté?
Have you tried to allow voting over several days, according to what criteria or another?
Well, unlike what is being requested federally for Saturday and Sunday, we requested that there be there was advance voting over a 5-day period with significant number of hours available, and then on election day we allowed for a regular time, but we had the schools closed, so students weren't in attendance. We also had an outlet with the vote by mail option, which again spread out the process. So physically, we maintained about the same with increased number of polling locations, but we had a very long period in which you could apply for a ballot by mail.
Mr. Boagman.
Mr. Boagman?
We also planned our election to spread the vote out over all opportunities, including vote by mail, advance voting, and on election day. Our legislation calls for 6 days of advance voting, including a Saturday and Sunday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. each day. Using my powers to adapt the legislation, I added an additional day, so we had 7 days running from the Thursday through the Wednesday preceding voting day where advance voting was available. Anecdotally, we don't have a formal way of tracking wait times, but anecdotally, during voting day, there were no waits. It was certainly we achieved our goal of spreading out voters, especially on that day.
Merci.
Thank you, Madame Normandin. Mr. Blakey?
I just wanted to ask quickly about the length of the writ period. That's something that the Chief Elections Officer of Canada has mentioned in his recommendations, and I just wonder if you can speak to the advantages of or disadvantages of having a longer writ period in the pandemic context? Let me start with Mr. Boogman.
Certainly, in British Columbia, by law, there's two different models for the length of the campaign period. In a fixed date election, the voting day is the 28th day after the election is called. For an on-demand election, it varies between an additional 4 and 10 days onto that length period, and the idea is that it will, depending upon the day the election is called, it will ensure that voting day takes place on a Saturday. In the context of a snap election in a pandemic, having more time was critical for Elections BC to be able to establish our offices, to be able to send supplies, to be able to establish the telecommunications network that enabled us to communicate with our offices. So my bottom line would be that more time obviously is better from an election administration perspective, especially when it's an on-demand election.
Mr. Boda?
Yes, our writ period is from 27 to 35 days. The writ period was the shortest possible for our election. However, because we had a set election date in legislation, we were aware in April that we were getting ready for an election for October. And I'll agree with Mr. Boogman that this is very important in election administration. That stability and preparation is extremely important, particularly in a COVID context where you are preparing to make that voting safer for everyone. And so a longer period would be better.
And so in a minority parliament context, giving some clarity around the confidence convention to have a little bit more of a lead time or sense of how a snap election might be triggered, is that something that would also be helpful from the point of view of electoral administration?
Well, I would speak to the overall approach of offering a longer period of time for preparation. How that is achieved, I'll leave that to the legislators.
Mr. Boogman?
Yeah, I'll certainly agree with that latter comment that Dr. Boda made. I think from our perspective as election administrators in a minority government, it's my mandate to be ready. So we were ready in a non-pandemic environment, February 2020, and we pivoted. We immediately embarked on learning about the pandemic, learning how it would impact voting processes and what adaptations we needed to make to our processes in order to have a safe election. So that was our focus through the summer, and as it turns out, it was good that we did that.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of the participants and especially the witnesses, Mr. Boogman and Dr. Boda. We really appreciate it. I know that your testimony here today is going to help us in formulating a good report and good recommendations, hopefully, that come out of it. Thank you so much for being here. And to all of the members that are of the subcommittee, a separate email was sent out with the login details. Please log in as soon as possible after logging out of this meeting. So I'll see you in the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you.